All right, welcome back everyone after a week off. Today we are diving into one of the stories that I associate with Sunday school. I remember hearing this one as a kid, and we're just talking about Samuel's call story because I think it's rich and it has one of those where there's a lot to think about and kind of, even though it's a fairly straightforward story, this is one that it seems like it has more than just historic value. So we can think about how we relate or how we interact with this story.
Mhm.
So, let me start off with some initial impressions. Because for me, this is a familiar story. I'm curious if you all have heard it before and what details kind of jumped out at you from this read through.
I was just looking at, yes, it's familiar to, I've heard it before, but there's a lot of things in this that have almost double meaning. Or like we were just talking about the word, none of his words fell to the ground, and in the beginning the word of the Lord was rare, visions were not widespread, and his eyesight began to grow dim. And I think of that, Israel's eyesight had also grown dim, and ours grows dim in more ways than needing cataract surgery. But
Yeah, I certainly remember hearing the story in Sunday school. But what I couldn't remember was what lesson did they draw from it. I knew that Samuel thought Eli was calling it one, but the Lord was calling Samuel. Well, okay, so what?
Yeah, so what? I love that question. It's like, okay, like where do we go from here with it?
and especially for a Sunday school story. Is this to tell the children, like, God is calling you to be a nice person? I mean, that's kind of the moralistic tone we use them, but what does that mean for a child?
Yeah.
Well, also, Samuel didn't seem to understand that it was God's call. And I thought, it seems like he ought to have. And then I thought, well, his eyes were dim, just as you were saying. Maybe his eyes were a little dim at that point, too. But he should have been expecting it,
Yeah, kind of distinguishing God's voice from other voices.
Yes.
It's interesting that one kind of sounds like the other.
Yeah. And you wonder, why didn't God say, "Hey, Samuel, it's God speaking"? Calls him 3 times, and Eli sends him back to bed.
This makes a better story.
Yes, it builds up the tension, doesn't it? So the way the story is told.
All right. Here we go. All right. So let's go ahead and jump in and kind of walk through the story beats and build up that tension and see where it goes and see if there is kind of a lesson to draw from all of this.
Okay.
So, what do we remember about Samuel? Just to start off with, I know it was 2 weeks ago. Let's do a little bit of a refresher. Who is Samuel and why is he in the temple?
Well, Hannah was his father. Hannah was his mother. She didn't have any children, but with the help of the Lord, she said if she could have a child, she'd give her firstborn as a Nazarite. Is that what they call them? And the child would serve in the temple.
Perfect. So Samuel is in some ways just an average kid from an average family, but because of the situation of his birth, he's kind of set aside. And he's in the temple, not because of his family lineage, but because his mother has dedicated him to the temple. One quick clarification. I think that my translation uses temple, which is interesting because the temple is not built yet. We are still in the age of the tabernacle, but I know my translation is using the word temple. So if we're going back and forth, remember, I think it's just good to remember that this is a canvas temple. It's acting the way that the stone temple will be, but the stone temple, as we would imagine it, is a few lifetimes away.
Right, okay.
So then, just a quick refresher, that was great. Thank you for that, Larry. You hit all the points. Who is Eli then?
Priest.
Yeah.
The priest, yes. And what's the deal with Eli and his sons?
Oh, they're not doing their job.
Yeah.
Levi had let his sons get an early slice of the sacrifice.
Right.
The prime cut.
And so while Eli himself may be a decent priest, he's evidently not the best father figure, if only because his sons are running wild and he's not really parenting his sons, and his sons are not doing a good job at being priests. Yeah, Larry?
Can we use this then in support of the fact that the parent is responsible for the actions of their children?
So, I mean, what do you all think?
Well, they certainly tried it in that school shooting and succeeded.
Well, they increasingly are holding parents responsible. I think parents often feel that what their kids do reflects badly on them. I don't know how and I think other people think so too. What does the Bible say? Does the Bible say that parents are responsible for their kids act up? Yeah, right.
I mean, in this story, Eli is being held responsible for his son's actions.
He's going to be, he's going to lose his job too, right? Is Samuel going to become a priest and a king, or a priest and a leader, or combination?
So we will hold off on what Samuel becomes. We're going to see that as it goes along. I'm not going to answer that right away.
It doesn't tell us whether or not Eli tried to restrain them. I mean, maybe he really did and wasn't successful. I want to think that, because I would hate to be responsible myself for some of the actions of my kids, you know. I'm sure you try to restrain them and you try to do what you can, but they don't always do what you want them to do, even if you try.
Yeah, Larry?
And Eli now is pretty old, so his sons are probably adults now, particularly if they're stealing the best food out of the pot in the tabernacle there. So
yeah. So I often think of there being 3 influences minimum of like how a child develops the personality that they do. The one is there is something that I do think is inherent, like people's dispositions. Notably, this has been a debate in my family, if only because my aunt criticized my mom for being a bad mother because I was a headstrong child. As a 2-year-old, I knew how to vault myself out of the crib. My mom tells the story of hearing a thunk and seeing me go scurrying away. There's a part where that's just disposition. There's a second point where people's parenting styles makes a difference.
Yeah, that's true.
Where some gentle parents will have a different outcome than parents who are very more authoritarian. The age of the parent and how energetic they are in raising the children can make a difference. I mean, I've heard people talk about if there's like a large age gap between siblings, that the parent that the parent that parented the oldest child is not necessarily the same person by the time they get to their youngest child.
Mhm.
And so that's one where how people parent does influence how that disposition plays out. But I think there's a third thing that comes into play, especially in this, and that is the social setting of that a child is born into. Because you will have a different experience as a child if you are, this is just an example, if you are in a low income family, but in a high income community, you're going to have a different relationship with your peers than if you are a high income child in a low income area. And that can lead to how parenting styles will affect the disposition and as it plays out with peers. And so there's a thing where there's basically, this is a way to say there's the individual themselves, there's the parent, and then there's society. And how those three work together influences how people develop, at least in what I am seeing in this situation. So you have Eli's sons who are raised in a powerful family, seemingly with an older father anyways, who may have been lower energy, and they have a disposition. And this had led them to the place where they are now.
It could be also that Eli didn't try very hard.
Yeah, I agree.
And I mean, I kind of think that God knew Eli's heart, and maybe he just didn't try.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that the other factor might be that, or another angle to look at this would be that Eli at some point didn't take his charge as being priest seriously. I mean, the first time they were caught doing this, you know, there should have been a significant day and so forth. And if there was a second time, so I feel that Eli just kind of was lax in his responsibility as a priest, because he got a lot of benefits from being a priest. This was you know, and all he had was he only had a few things to watch over.
Mm-hmm.
Have to run around the hillside and chase the goats, whatever. He had
Well, yeah. Isn't he kind of old now?
He is.
started when he was younger. Right? That's the way
Yeah.
I know.
Habits develop over years. So I see Mary Ellen, then Gretchen.
Well, I think the factor here is there were two sons. And, you know, one probably would have followed his nature and done his thing, but having two to interact and urge each other on and come up with plans and have a buddy, I think it's a factor here as well.
Mm-hmm. Fair. Yeah. Gretchen, did you have another thought?
Well, I was going to say, biblically, I would think people who are even today, people who are very Bible oriented would say that parents should take charge of their children and handle them. It's like you were saying as a child that you were the one who could jumped out of bed. You probably, you know, I had a daughter like this, you know, she stayed up late. We just finally started just going to bed and leaving her up to read. But, you know, that's not what the experts who believe in the Bible say. Spare the rod, spoil the child. They really expect that you will be very stern and disciplined and treat your children so that they do right to God, do right to each other. So disgusting, frankly. I find it so appalling myself, you know.
Yeah, Larry?
Wasn't Eli warned earlier, though, that bad things were going to come in his family? So
Mhm.
Maybe he just sort of had given up. I mean, God had told him it's going to turn out badly. Well, okay, who am I to question that?
Mhm.
We'll just ride it along the best we can.
Right. So our last Bible study, chapter 2 ended with a man of God, this random stranger, coming up and giving this prophecy that Eli's family was going to have a downfall. So Eli kind of already knows that this may be in the cards, that he had fallen short.
Mhm.
To put this kind of in context, going off of some of what Gretchen was saying, the culture at the time, if you remember, is very patriarchal. And so that is, the man is the head of the household and everyone else falls in line. And as the head of the household, one of your responsibilities is keeping people in line. And so, culturally speaking, whether this is accurate to human psychology or not, their expectation is your children are a reflection on your leadership. And if your children are not behaving, that is a sign that you are not doing your job. Whether that is fair or not, that is the assumption. And so Eli's children are not reflecting well on him. And we can discuss why. There's another possibility, and Eli might take his role seriously, but because he is taking his duties and responsibilities so seriously, he never parented his children. And I've also seen that where the adult is very good at what they do, but they're so good at what they do, they neglect other responsibilities. And so that may also be the case, that Eli took his role as a priest seriously, but he didn't prepare the next generation to do the same. One of the reasons why I kind of want to give Eli the benefit of the doubt, if only a little bit, is because he is still basically responsible for Samuel's development, and he is entrusted with Samuel, and Samuel turns out pretty well. And so evidently Eli is decent enough at his role that a child with a different situation and a different disposition turns out differently than his own sons. But yeah, Mary Ellen?
Well, it said earlier that Samuel's mother, and I'm not good with the names right now, would wait until he was weaned before she delivered him to the temple. Now, that's at a very young age. And if she gave him to the temple at that point, Eli had his hands full. This child, this young child, and all the growing years, for him to train to be, active and effective in the temple. He may not, his sons were off doing their thing, but he had this child that he was responsible for. So, his attention was, yeah. And so, I give Eli a little slack here too. He had a young child he was trying to keep up with. And there's no mention of a wife here.
Correct. She may or may not exist in the picture at this time. We just don't know because the text doesn't always record women. At any rate, there are two details that are helpful for envisioning this story of Samuel running back and forth with Eli. And this is coming directly from my notes the notes at the bottom of my Bible to kind of just orient ourselves and make sense of things. So this is a slight sketch of the tabernacle, where we have the entrance gates, the outer courtyard here. So this is outside of the tent where the sacrifices would be burned and all of that. We have the doors on the entrance. It is saying that Samuel is lying down in the temple of the Lord where the ark is. He is not in the Holy of Holies. This is the place where priests would only go a few times a year, but it does seem like he's either lying over here or over here. So it seems like Samuel is in the tabernacle itself, whereas Eli is close by, which means that it is suggesting that there might be some kind of been some kind of quarters that they had built to one of the sides. Eli is close enough that theoretically Samuel could expect to hear him somewhere around this vicinity. So it may be that Eli is sleeping over here or over here, but they are likely in this complex. So any questions on like the layout or like where things are? The other clue that we get that they are likely in and around this area is, I see your hand, Larry, give me just a moment. The beginning of the story says that the lamp of God had not yet gone out. That is probably the menorah here.
Okay.
So Eli is within visual of the menorah, so that's why we also know that he's hanging around somewhere. And the lamp of God would be burning throughout the night. They light it at the evening and it burns until morning. So we're not yet in the morning because the lamp of God is still lit. So was that your question, Larry?
That's my question.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. So it is said that Eli doesn't have good eyesight. It was already suggested, yes, it's likely cataracts, but I forgot who said it. Someone suggested that the eyes growing dim has a metaphorical meaning. And whoever said that, would you like to explain or expand on what it might mean to have the eyes of your soul grow dim?
Well, I was thinking of it like kind of a becoming oblivious to things. And I think this fits, I was thinking that it kind of fit with Eli in ignoring, in a way, what his sons were doing, that he was, things weren't, he had lost the clarity about his role as a priest and his role as a parent, and things were just kind of fuzzy for him. He wasn't sharp. He wasn't the brightest in the bulb in the box by this time.
Well, he also had this magical child that he was raising, was supposed to be somebody special, so he might have been pretty preoccupied, more interested in the, it's like when you have a younger child and he becomes special and the older kids kind of get left out in the cold. And they were probably grandfathers themselves. I don't know if this, no, he said he was still having kids.
So one of the things to remember is there's a strong like Eli is not the only person at the temple. Samuel is likely being raised by committee, is how I would say it, that as people rotate through the temple service, there are other people in and around the area doing things. It's not like this team of 3 is doing all of the temple duties. There's a lot to be done. There are likely other people that aren't mentioned, but Eli had a strong role to play.
Oh, okay.
So if Eli's eyes are growing dim, if you think about as I've heard people just like talk about cataracts, it's not that you are losing all of your sight, it's that things are becoming fuzzy. You can't see details. What are some other things that you all, or if you all have experienced this, what are some other things that happen?
With your eyes?
Yeah.
Well, you could have macular degeneration, you could have glaucoma,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Dry eyes,
Mhm.
the desert.
Which is a,
Mhm. So if the edges are getting blurry and he's not able to kind of see the detail, if he's not as sharp and he's kind of the de facto leader, because we're coming off of the time of the judges and there's not a king, there's not a central authority, this is the religious figure. Is this, in your leader has unclear vision, how does that affect the rest of the system?
in many times they'd take advantage of that.
Mhm.
I mean, well, he's not noticing, he's not saying anything important, he's not talking to us.
Oh,
He can't see.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mary Ellen, did I see a hand?
No,
Oh, okay.
Sue was going to say something. I thought.
Okay. The other thing that I'm thinking about is if the leader doesn't have clear vision, they're also not able to broadcast a clear vision, which means everything there from there on kind of gets a little fuzzy, which we see that at the end of the book of Judges, where everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes. But if their vision is growing dim, if things are getting fuzzy, there's
Mhm.
not one clear vision of how to bring people together. So we have both Eli who has bad vision, lying down. Samuel is lying in the temple of the Lord. Notably, the Ark of the Covenant is nearby, and that is important. The Ark is nearby, and so theoretically, God is on the Ark standing nearby. And then the Lord calls to Samuel, saying, Samuel, Samuel. And I'm curious what you think of this as compared. So the fancy $10 word is theophany. The theophany is God's revealing of God's self or calling of people. What do you think of this version of the theophany as compared to other characters we've already seen? Think about Moses or Abraham or Jacob. Are there parts that are familiar? Are there parts that are new in this with God's calling to Samuel?
when
yeah, 'cause the word, some of the words that here I am is the same. Here I am.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mary Ellen?
in the previous examples of the Lord calling, the person who was calling to understood that it was coming from the Lord. There was no confusion in their minds. And it says in verse 1 that the word of the Lord was rare in those days. And so they weren't expecting it to come directly from the Lord, or Samuel wasn't expecting to be the recipient of a call from the Lord. So to me, that's very different.
And thank you for picking up that one detail of the word of the Lord was rare. We also kind of noticed that in some of the previous stories of like, where is God in all of this? Like God's kind of absent from these stories, and here we get the verification that yeah, the word of the Lord is rare enough they're not expecting it. So Gary, I thought I heard you start to chime in.
I'm sorry for the interruption.
You're good.
There's also the fact that Samuel has been there for thousands of days, and when he got called, it was always Eli that called him. So what reason did he have to believe that it wasn't Eli?
It wasn't Eli.
Right. So it's this interesting, or with the details that we see here. So, I mean, that is spot on, Gary. He's been there and he's being trained, and if someone's going to call him, it's normally going to be Eli. But what does it say about the sound of God's voice? If it sounds, even if Samuel theoretically has never heard the actual voice of God before,
Yeah.
but when it calls to him, it sounds familiar.
Oh. Well, Eli doesn't recognize it till the third call. You know, and I think you know, there's sort of that thing, well, if his vision's getting bad, chances are his hearing probably isn't too good either. You know, I mean, he's an old man, his acuity just isn't sharp anymore. No, God hasn't called anybody for heavens knows how long, you know, and so you wouldn't expect him to respond immediately to the first call.
Mhm. Yeah. So by the details, my assumption at least is that Eli is not hearing this voice. It is only Samuel who hears this.
Okay.
Mhm.
And that is my assumption, just because Eli is just like, hey, I didn't call you. I don't know. Like, Eli seems kind of oblivious that anything is happening. And it's just like all of a sudden being woken up out of your sleep with this young boy saying, hey, I'm here. And he's like, what? I didn't call you. Go away. I want my sleep. So Samuel's kind of shooed away of saying, I didn't call you. Go back to bed. I don't know what you're talking about. And it happens a second time where God calls to Samuel. Evidently, Samuel doesn't, or the voice sounds familiar enough to think that it's his mentor. But also he may be unfamiliar or not expecting God to call. And so a second time he goes running to his mentor and going, hey, you called me. And Samuel or Eli's like, no, go back to bed. Like, what's going on with this kid? And then it's the third time that Samuel runs in. And there's part of me that I'm thinking about how I wake up, that the first time I can imagine Eli being really groggy and just not really awake and just kind of like shooing him away. The second time being like, huh? But by the third time that someone wakes you up, I feel like that one your brain actually turns on. Like, oh wait, something's actually happening. I should think about this. And that's when he realizes, wait, we're in like right next to the holy space. He's hearing a voice. It's not me. It's probably God. So what do you think is going through Eli's head if all of a sudden Eli maybe never heard God's direct voice? We don't know, but if the word of God is rare in these days, there's a chance that he's inherited this role and never himself heard God's voice. And all of a sudden you figure out this young boy might be hearing a direct line from God. What do you think is going through his mind?
I just think it could be a mixture. It could be, oh, it's happening. He's growing up. And it also could be, well, he's too young. He's not ready yet. I mean, I think it could be both ways in some.
He could
Yeah,
be.
and he might feel the child Samuel is my responsibility. You know. And now I think God is calling him. Now I better be sure that he's all set and ready to listen to what God is going to tell him, you know, and then relay it to me, of course.
But the other thing would be that it sounds as though Eli's sons are not going to really inherit the same way as they would have if this child was not so special. That the reign is over.
Yeah, Mary Ellen.
I have a question about what the Lord said to Eli, and I'm looking at verses 12 and 13. Particularly 13, that where the Lord is speaking and he says to Samuel, and he said, for I have told him that I'm about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them. And
Yeah.
so Eli had heard this message before somehow, and to me this is indicative of God has spoken to him in the past, this message. And so now he's telling Samuel, you know, this is the message that Eli ignored. So,
Yeah.
oh,
Larry?
Yeah, but God did not give that message to Eli directly. That came through that messenger, didn't it? A messenger appeared before Eli and told him all the terrible things that were going to happen to to his family. It wasn't that the Lord was speaking to him directly.
So
It does say that Eli had been given the word of the Lord, and Samuel had not yet.
Okay. So yes. So there's the part that it's like, for I have told him, is that part specifically is likely a callback to the previous chapter where the stranger wanders into town, talks directly to Eli saying, hey, your sons are being awful. I'm prophesying destruction on your house. So when it's talking about prophecy, it is a direct call. But it does seem that, I stand corrected, that Eli probably, it sounds like Eli may have in the past had that direct line with God, where God would talk directly to him. Which makes it all the more heartbreaking when he realizes that God's not talking to me anymore. God's talking to the child. That hurts. If all of a sudden God's given up talking to you directly because God's told you things directly and you didn't listen. So his instructions for Samuel are like, lie down, say, speak, for your servant is listening. So he like tells him the words, like, this is what you do. And Eli follows his mentor's instructions. Samuel goes back, God calls again. So this is the fourth time now. God calls Samuel 4 times before Samuel is given the instruction on how to do this. And he responds with, speak, for your servant is listening. Now, there's a lovely detail that I noticed only this time through, is starting in verse 10, it says, now the Lord came and stood there, which has a very corporeal sense, which goes along with the sense of the Ark of the Covenant, that's God's throne. And so God's almost stepping off the throne to go talk to Samuel. And so God is, in some ways, thought to be corporeal, kind of there. And giving the instructions that, yes, he has told Eli that his house is not doing what he said. Eli did not correct it, so now it is going to be, he is going to be replaced. And the last detail, in verse 14, I swear that the house of Eli, that the iniquities of Eli's house shall not be expiated, thank you, by sacrifice or offerings forever. So the priests regularly do offerings to like cleanse themselves of their own sin, to make them holy enough to do the priesthood work. And God's basically saying, yeah, like that's no longer going to work. You're like, what you are doing is egregious enough that that's not actually going to clear away the guilt. I actually have to change out the leadership because you're not doing it. Yeah, Larry?
You know, in a number of years, apparently, has transpired between the time the stranger came and told Eli, things aren't going to go well for your family. And so he's known that, and he's been thinking about it all this time. And you can see now he's being told, okay, Eli, this is it. We've reached the end. You're done.
You had your chance. Yeah, Mary Ellen?
Well, I think it's interesting, following up on what Larry was saying, in verse 15, Samuel lay there until morning. He didn't.
So we've been doing a lot about Eli psychology. Let's put ourselves in Samuel's position. So we're not given an age for Samuel. There's not really any indicator of how old he is. I have seen depictions of it where Samuel's like a little 8-year-old, and there's a chance he may adulthood starts around like 17 or 18 for them. That's actually in our text when they do the census, it's for everyone 18 and older. Okay. So a preteen is like well within the realm, which is kind of more what I'm thinking. Someone 12 to 14 years old, young enough to be considered a boy, but old enough to be seen as someone who has a little bit of authority and wisdom when he starts speaking these things. What are you thinking if you're kind of a 12 or 14-year-old kid and you've just been talked to directly by God, and God said that your mentor is about to lose his place in society? What do you think's going through Samuel's mind?
He's afraid. He doesn't want to tell him, I don't think. I mean, I don't think I would want to say anything, but he comes through and he does what the Lord tells him to do, which gives him authority right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but he has to be threatened to tell it.
Well, yeah, Eli is pretty threatening.
Yeah, Eli is pretty nasty there.
Yeah, because you better tell me or else.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
This was a significant assignment the Lord gave him, and I think he needed some process time before, and it seems natural to. There was no hurry. He didn't tell him do it right now. He just said tell him.
Yeah.
Didn't say today, tomorrow, but sometime you got to give him the bad news.
Mm-hmm.
And he's already had the bad news. He had it earlier. So yeah, this a little time can be taken.
See, so Eli's reaction is tell me, and if you're not honest with me, you're going to be cursed. Clay, you said in your mind you heard this as being like nasty and kind of aggressive.
Yeah, I was a little surprised.
Okay.
To hear to read that part where he just said, may God do so to you and more also if you hide anything from me that he told you. I thought, whoa. Mm-hmm. I expected more of tell me what the Lord said, not not this. And also in 19 it says, and Samuel grew. So I'm with you on the idea that he could be maybe between 12, 13, something like that, and 14, because he's going to grow into a man after this point.
Yeah. So is there another way to hear Eli's response? Because I got to be honest, the way I heard it was different, which is not good or bad. It's just a different way to hear it. Did anyone hear that response differently?
Well, I think he wanted to make sure that Samuel told him everything, because this is a big hurdle for Samuel to go over to talk to Eli and give him this message. So don't soften it up. Just tell me what facts are.
Yeah, it could also be like the mom saying, if you don't tell me the truth, I'll know. You know, I'm just now seeing that, like, you know, tell me everything, or I just might know that you're not.
Mhm.
And he may want Samuel to respond to the Lord rather than to him.
Mhm. So that's more of what I personally heard, which is just one way of everyone hears the intonation differently, and I think they all have a little bit of validity to them. But I heard it as, do not spare my feelings.
Mhm.
You need to do what God is telling you, and I am more afraid of God than my own feeling. So kind of being like this is serious enough that like there's going to be consequences if you don't do what God is saying. And almost like that realization of my time is past and I know it, and he probably doesn't have like, does Eli realize that, oh, he messed up and he knows it, and he knows that Samuel might try to shield him from it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Don't spare me. I need to know if this is going to be bad. Please tell me if this is going to be bad. I have a feeling this is going to be bad. That's what I heard. But like I said, it could also be that slight jealousy of, God talked to you, not me. Tell me exactly what God said.
You could look at it as the last instruction he gives his student.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
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 Yeah. Mhm. So yeah, Samuel grew up, which, once again, I do think that puts him as like a preteen and growing into an adult. But as we were talking about before we hit record, there's the lovely phrase, the Lord was with him and let none of his words fall to the ground,
Mhm.
which is a way to say like people were listening.
Mhm.
People paid attention to him. And they knew that Samuel was a trustworthy prophet from the Lord. I'm going to take it because that final lesson, Gary, as you said, he took it seriously of like, don't spare people's feelings if God is telling you to say things. And so the word of Israel the word of Samuel comes to all of Israel. So the final thing I want to think about, and this is where I don't know if this is the Sunday school lesson, but I think it's interesting to think about how leadership changes over and when you need kind of a refresh. This is not just one layer of leadership moving out and another one moving in. This is someone young coming into leadership. And today as a society, what do we think about young people and their ability to lead? Thinking about middle schoolers who have opinions about the world and the way it should be. I'm thinking about high schoolers and what it means for them to have political thoughts, but not the ability to vote. And when do we listen to young people? And when do we be like, no, you need some more time in the world to understand it? When do we take leadership cues, and when is it appropriate to take leadership cues from young idealistic people? And when is it that we need to coach them a little bit more?
Well, we accept their word when it agrees with us. You know, it's hard to judge, you know, when is a person mature enough to make decisions?
Mhm.
You know, I mean, we define it by age, you know, which is probably not entirely accurate, you know.
Well, in this case, I think Samuel was showing leadership from the time that God spoke to him. He grew, it says. And so I think gradually he became this kind of a person that people trusted and knew that he had the ability to lead.
Yeah.
It reminds me of a couple of Greta in is it Norway or Sweden? I'm not sure where, but
Environmental, yeah.
yeah, you know, and I thought that we like it when we agree with them.
Mhm.
And obviously, people don't want to hear her. They don't want to hear what she has to say.
Yeah.
We do see people who show remarkable leadership. The young woman in Afghanistan who said, you know, I want to learn to read. I want to participate. I want to, and she's gone on to continue that.
Yeah. Yeah. Mary Ellen?
I'm finding a corollary, I guess, to when Jesus was on the steps of the temple at 13 or approximately so, and he had been left behind by his parents as they left. And, you know, he was standing on the steps of the temple and he was preaching and people listened. And so you've got two young men with a similar experience. I guess I just should stop there. I'm just seeing that comparison, I guess.
Okay.
Well, and he grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. I mean, it's pretty obvious, isn't it, when you look back that? But that's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah, Larry?
And in a way, Samuel's leadership role eventually is going to be different from Eli's. I mean, he wasn't just raised to be Eli's replacement as a priest. I mean, he's been raised to become a prophet, you know, which is certainly a different sort of job to have.
Right. Yeah. So it's something to think about, because one thing I'm always chewing on is there is sometimes where the older you get, the more complicated the world looks. And sometimes adults overcomplicate things. And it really is like the youth in some ways can see through the overcomplication and go, actually, I'm going to call you out for the issues that they see. And there are times where we need to be reminded that in the end, it is pretty simple. It can be complicated in the execution, but sometimes things really are that simple and straightforward. And then sometimes the adults are correct, and it really is more complicated than people realize. That it seems straightforward, and then when you do get into the details, you're like, oh no, I very much misunderstood this. There's a lot of nuance, and the idealism that you can get wrapped up in isn't as straightforward as you would hope.
And the nature
of
unintended consequences.
right. And so to me, the thing that I think what I personally think is important here is that Eli's willing to listen. And what does it's one of those like building connection between generations, knowing that both sides are like both viewpoints are very needed. Sometimes you need that idealism, and that idealism can be so refreshing if you're jaded and you're just stuck in all the details and you're used to things not working out, and you hear someone who actually has a vision for a better world. But then also knowing how to talk to someone who it's like, yes, we tried this. This is why it didn't work. Let me help you with that idealism and where we can feasibly go with it. So what are ways that, or what do you do with that if we're trying to build connection between wisdom and youthful idealism? How can we be somewhat like Eli if we know that maybe we didn't do as good of a job as we had hoped? How do you listen to the young?
I don't know how, I remember when I realized that the young had really good ideas. Yeah, it was time to pass the torch. It was, yeah, it was, but it was even before that. I just, I remember feeling a little surprised, and then I was really young when I saw that. And it was kind of exciting. But at the same time, you think you're going to be displaced.
Well, I think you have to listen actively and pay real true attention to what they're saying and doing.
Yeah.
Through that, sometimes you can begin to agree with them if you truly listen. And if it's a good idea or a good thing, you can discern that, I think.
Are there times where you hear something where the youth are very concerned about something, very passionate about something, but you don't hear the call that they do? So in the story, Eli didn't hear the call of God.
Yeah.
Samuel did. Are there times where it seems like the youth are hearing a call that you're just missing? Are there things they care about that you don't understand?
Well, I might understand them, but not really want to go along with it.
Okay.
Sometimes I think I'm smarter than they are, so they're just going nuts on this idea, and I don't think I want to go there. So, and then if you keep listening, sometimes it begins to make sense.
Yeah.
And I think there are certain things that are just naturally going to be different amongst age group. The thought that came to my mind was all the concerns about additives and preservatives and dyes and so forth, which are largely a concern of the young, and rightly so, because they're going to be exposed to it all of their life. Whereas someone in my age group, I could care less. I've been eating it for 93 years, I'm not going to worry about the last few, So there's that dichotomy, that's going to be just different because of the stage of life that one is in, And you can listen. It's hard for the older person to say, well, that's bad to worry about that sort of thing and doing something about it. You've got to be willing to say, hey, from your standpoint, that's a grand idea. Fine, go ahead. Let's get it done. It's a good thing.
Well, I think young people also are more concerned about the climate change. I mean, although a lot of older people are too, because they're thinking of their own grandchildren and what they may have to live with in the future. So in a case like that, I think that even old people can relate to what the young are saying, because that's something we're all, pretty much all of us are concerned about. And we want that to be taken care of.
But not all of us are concerned about it.
Yeah.
No, that's true.
I mean, there's a whole
True.
That's one that I think is, I mean, younger people they have vested interest in that, like Larry said. We're old enough, a few hot summers, okay, but think about that for the rest of your life.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the older people who are concerned about it want those changes for their future, for the future of the earth.
Yes.
And a lot of people are already suffering seriously.
Yes, definitely.
So the two issues that I hear a lot of young people talking about when I listen to them, I mean, the two big ones are gun violence and environmental issues, where gun issues in particular, that's one where I think adults think the issue is very complicated and we need to listen to the youth saying, like we don't want this. This is like our safety. This is our mental health. The solution really is easy. And environmentalism is another one where they're looking at what the vast majority of scientists are saying, and they're like, we don't have control over this, and we're the ones who are going to live through it. So can you please listen to us? And so those are two issues, and that it's interesting the way that young people and old people seem to have a disconnect in the conversation. And young people are often discredited because of their youth over those topics. But the question is, how do we engage them and hear their passion and hear their reasons and start to try to understand? Because I think some of this is a calling, and a calling that they may be hearing that we may have to slow down to understand. So, but going back to the story in front of us about Samuel and Eli, any final thoughts or details we didn't hit about this back and forth between the young Samuel and the older Eli, and kind of the transition from one's being in power to the other?
I think another sort of the Sunday school lesson was that the importance of children, and that God, the Sunday school teachers I had, well, God is caring about you too, and speaking to you through your life, and listen. So
you're never too young to listen, and you're never too old to listen as well. All right. Well, folks, shall we pray out for today, and then we'll.
Yes, that'd be good. Thank you.
All right. Let us pray. Loving God, we trust that you truly do call people at every stage of life. You call the young to dream dreams, and the old people to see visions of what could be. You call people who are inexperienced and idealistic to see through the complications to the solution you have called us to walk into. And then you call those that are wise, who have seen the ins and outs, who have tried things and failed, to guide that vision, to work in the nuance and the details. So help us understand what each person brings to the table, the value each person brings, and why you have called young and old alike. Because we are truly the body of Christ together. And you call us all into your love and into your kingdom to bring it about together. So especially as we enter the final weeks of this election season, help us care about what others care about. Even perspectives we don't agree with, help us understand what is motivating them. Help us deal with kindness and compassion and love, so that we may build the world you have called us to bring into being. And so be with this group in all the places that we are this coming week, until we are able to gather again next week. In Jesus' name, amen.
amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Good